All right, so I think I met everybody but Gary last week. So my name is Christina Indovina. I'm a tutoring specialist here at Literacy Pittsburgh. Today we're going to be talking about MathSense 1 and 2 and the new lesson plan site that we just rolled out. Before I begin, did anyone attend our tutor conference a few weeks ago?
Not here.
Okay. We rolled out lesson plans for our Journey to Success series and our Standout series. So Standout is what we use with our English language learners, and Journey to Success is a book that we use with our mostly students who are working on reading, writing in English, and most of those students are on their way to a high school equivalency degree. Many of those students, not all of them, are also students who are going to be studying math. We just completed and uploaded the lesson plans for the MathSense series and wanted to go over where to find the lessons, kind of how it is that we envision using them. So we're going to get started today. If anyone has any questions at the end of this, it would be great to hold your questions for now, and then we should have enough time at the end for us to talk through any questions that any folks might have. But all right, I'm going to get moving. All right, so the presentation goals today are pretty clear. I'm just going to be covering really quickly the components of MathSense 1 and 2. I just want to make sure that everybody knows about kind of all of the basic components of the book. Using the new lesson plan website, we're going to cover how to get to the website, how to find the lesson plans, what the lesson plans look like and what they include. And then on the lesson plans is something called extended practice. That's kind of our way of saying homework, but we also using that term to recognize that some students may not have the time to do homework. Homework may bring up kind of visions of grade school and high school. And so to use this idea that extended practice is something they can do in class, outside of class if they have time. All right, so MathSense 1 and 2, hopefully all of you have these books if you're using them. If you don't, we do have the ability for you to have hard copies of these. Your students should have hard copies of these. If they don't, please talk to your program coordinator. We want the students writing in these books, so please make sure that your students are, writing their thoughts down, writing notes, writing answers, scratching things out in here, because we don't want the books back from the students. There is no teacher's edition for these books. This is a book series, has pretty detailed explanations for most things. We'll talk a little bit about kind of some of the supplementing that's probably that you may want to do as you're working your way through these. All right, so MathSense 1 covers the idea of whole numbers, decimals, fractions, ratios, measurements. It approximately covers the math that's taught between 3rd and 5th grade. We generally don't share that information with the students, but that's about kind of the math that they're doing. Is if they're in MathSense 1, they're working on the skills that you probably worked on through 5th or 6th grade. MathSense 2 gets into this idea of geometry, the ideas of algebra, the connections between algebra and geometry. And this covers approximately like 6th to 7th grade to about 10th grade. Most students can pass the GED after they get about halfway through. Ooh, I apologize, that is the wrong book. After they get through MathSense 2, that's the wrong cover. But if a student can get through usually to the end of geometry and a little bit into the connection between the two, that's usually enough math for them to get through and pass the GED math section. No matter where your student is when they walk in the door, they are going to have knowledge gaps. This is something we know to be true just across the board. I can say from my own personal experience that I had to study for the GRE for grad school, and I had to go back and fill in a lot of pretty basic gaps before I could move into the math I was expected to do on that test. Some of those gaps are going to be really basic. I myself found myself not knowing things like I couldn't remember some of the multiplication tables or like really basic formulas. I had to go back and like relook at them, relearn them. Your students may need to take steps back before stepping forward. That's, as I'm sure all of you know, that is one of probably the most frustrating things for our learners, is that they want this process to be finished, and sometimes it's hard to see kind of that they really do need to take 2 steps back before they're going to be able to take a giant step forward. Most of our students, not all of them, but most of our students report that math is the thing that they don't like. It's of all the subjects, it was the one that they like the least. Some students are literally terrified of math. And moving forward can take a while. And that's something, it's okay to reassure the student that if it is taking them a while to get through something, that is okay. I feel like a really big part of what we do with our students is be their cheerleaders, that they can do it. Really quickly, I'm going to go through the book layouts. I only do this because I have met folks who didn't know about kind of specific parts of this book. You guys can look in the front and see, these are the 2 books, Math Sense 1 and 2. You can kind of look to see that Math Sense 1 includes here, Unit 1 is a rehash of like addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. We're going to talk briefly about this, but if you have a student who is starting Math Sense 1 and they are stuck in Unit for more than, I'd say, like 3 weeks, if you just feel like you've gotten through addition, you've gotten through subtraction, but like you can't get through multiplication and division, reach out to your program coordinator. We may need to maybe take a little step down and we have some booklets here that could work to kind of build up the support that they need in those areas before they move back in here. Math Sense 2, you can kind of look, there is not a lot of review in this. When you start Math Sense 2, you kind of jump straight into the basics of algebra. When you start this book, we always suggest that you do the skill preview test in the beginning. The skill preview test it's a pretty short exam. You may need to do it in sections. I've seen folks who say that they sit down with their learner in the first lesson and meet them and just immediately do this. You can do that. You may want to break it into 2, especially if it's been a while since your student has done any math. This may like cause them to freeze. So it's okay to break this over a couple of sessions, get to know your learner, do the skill preview. When you get to the end, you score it, and then you can use it to kind of see which parts of the book you and your learner are really going to need to focus in on. As you start working through the book, you've probably noticed if you've used this series, the explanations for things are 1, sometimes 2 pages. For some students, these explanations are sufficient. You may find for other learners, this maybe isn't going to be enough explanation. If your student doesn't understand, we really, really encourage you to look online for more detailed explanations or other ways of explaining things. Khan Academy has videos for like pretty much everything that's in both of these books. And this is like a strong encouragement to go preview the videos. If the videos look like they're good explanations, either take what's in the video and do it with your student, or watch the video together with your student and work your way through it. At the end of each unit, you're going to find these unit reviews. Even if your student does the skill preview and it says that like they don't need anything at the end of unit 1 or unit 2, maybe they're going to start at unit 4. I would go back to the unit review for every unit that it said not to do, that it says that they don't need to do, and just do a few more problems from it. Make sure that they have a full grasp on the concepts before you try to build. I think everybody in this room knows math is it's a skill building. So, there are some parts of math, I feel like some parts of geometry where those are kind of a little bit more bifurcated, but anything with algebra, everything it scaffolds and it kind of builds straight up. So if a student is weak at different steps, you may find that they're not going to be able to really advance to the next step without kind of having a solid foothold really in what it is that's on these reviews. One of the kind of downsides that I have to this book is that I do find that the number of questions sometimes is not enough. So if you're working with a student and you find that you got through the explanation, they seem to grasp it, it's not new material, but it's stuff they haven't thought about in 15 years. So it's a not new, but it's a pretty heavy lift to get them to kind of grasp it, but they get it. And then they start doing the problems. You may find that 5 or 7 problems is just not enough. And if that is the case, we strongly recommend that you go online and find more problems in the areas that you can see that they are going to need additional work in or additional review. You probably already are doing that. I have tutors who make the problems up themselves, which is fine. I have one tutor who has a whole Google Forms. He has made like hundreds of Google Forms that are like additional activities and additional material. Whatever you find that works, definitely make sure that you're getting kind of the amount of work that a student needs in these different skill areas. I talked about this last week. There are some really good references in the back of both Math Sense 1 and Math Sense 2. I know Joanna and Jacqueline, you were both here last week, but we really love the back of the Math Sense 1 book, the toolkits that's back there for fraction charts, and then the decimal fraction and percentage equivalencies. If it helps, if this is something that you think your student is going to want to refer to a lot, it's totally fine to like have them print it out and just keep it next to them as a reference. I don't know, like I don't have these memorized off the top of my head necessarily, but these definitely help me when I am thinking about kind of when I'm looking at this and talking to tutors who are working with new or lower level students. These visual aids can help to the students kind of wrap their brains around how these concepts are related. Math Sense 2 gets, obviously more advanced. There's a really good calculator tutorial in the back of both Math Sense 1 and Math Sense 2. Math Sense 2 has more information in it about kind of how to use the calculator. It also has formulas. If you know that your student is going to be taking the GED, it's totally fine to like print out the formula sheet and have them keep that as a reference so that they know which formulas they don't need to memorize. A kind of caveat right now about calculators, we are currently facing supply chain issues getting calculators. So for right now, if you have a student that you're working with that is to the point where they need a scientific calculator, one of the cheats that we have right now is to use their phones. If the students turn their phones sideways, they have access to a scientific calculator on like 98% of smartphones. But this particular calculator, it's the TI-30XS, is the only calculator that the students are permitted to use on the GED. So at some point, they are going to want to get some practice with, learning how it works. There's simulated tests in the back of both books. I like these because it's covering, they're like GED-like questions at the back. And it only is covering the skills that are covered in the book. So it's not too advanced, which is nice. It can kind of help to build the students' confidence up. You also can use it to see kind of like at the end of it, you can look and say, did they miss a bunch of stuff with percentages or did they miss a bunch of stuff with fractions? We need to go back and review that, or I need to go find more information to present to my learner. So that's the book, or both books. There is a Math Sense 3. We do have every once in a while a student who's going on to community college, or maybe is somebody who's like more advanced in math. So if you have like a super whiz in math, we do have a Math Sense 3 book that does get into like pre-calc of calculus. I've had a tiny handful of those students, so they do exist. We have lesson plans now available for all of our commonly, I am blanking on the word. When a student comes in and they take the TABE test, which is the test that we give students to kind of level them to see what level their math is, Every student who comes in now gets a score and is going to get a learning plan that's going to say, like, here's your math book. We now have lesson plans for all of the Math Sense series, and these are going to be listed on our lesson. I am going to take a quick pause here and just ask, has everybody received the email from Hannah and have access to the lesson plan site? Thumbs up or yes, or we just want to make sure everybody here has access. Sorry, I see Joanna. Joanna says yes. Gary and Jacqueline, do y'all have access to the lesson plan site yet?
I think so.
Okay. Gary, do you? All right, we'll get back to Gary there. So the lesson plan site, if you've gone on and clicked around, it's pretty easy to get to the Math Sense stuff. You click on the home page, you click on Math Sense. When you get to this screen, you pick which book you're using. Are you using Math Sense 1 or Math Sense 2? This is all pretty intuitive. Hannah did a really great job of kind of setting up a really intuitive, easy to use website to kind of navigate through the lesson plans. We are going to have here, all of the unit lesson plans are up for both books. We are going to have a routine that you can use with the lesson plans that just kind of gives you a little bit of a guideline, a very, very rough guideline on how much time to spend on each section. And then I am going to be recording a video that walks through essentially what I just walked through with y'all with the components of the book and then the lesson plans, so that new tutors are going to be able to pick up their learning plan, pick up the book, watch the video, and kind of walk through and discover all of the parts and components of things. When you click on the unit, it's gonna take you to a folder in a Google Drive that you're just gonna pick the lesson. We will be updating these to include the names of the lessons so that you can look at these along with page numbers. I think that's gonna be helpful when you're going back to review things, when you may need to go back for a refresher. We're gonna pick a lesson here. Each of the Math Sense lesson plans covers between 2 to 3 pages of the actual book. It's designed to cover approximately 90 minutes of learning. For some lessons, you definitely are going to need more material. Others, you're going to finish up really quickly. I would recommend that you always have some sort of backup review work just in case you finish a lesson really quickly. I feel like math is one of those things that you're never quite sure of the gaps that you're going to encounter with your learner. So you may get to something that you think is going to take a while with your learner, but maybe that's something that they remember or could do really well. So all of a sudden you're finished. And then other things that you think they already know because maybe you covered some component of it a month ago, you get back to it and realize that you have to go like all the way back, or that it's just going to take a lot longer. We strongly recommend, and you all know this, always starting with the review using challenging items from previous lessons. I feel like every single student has things that they need to build on, things that they need to review. So Math Sense 1 and 2, Unit 1, I just wanted to add a really special note about these. These lessons include more book pages, especially for Math Sense 1, because the idea is that this is a review. Math Sense 1 specifically is designed to be a review. Math Sense 2, that Unit 1, it moves pretty quick. It's not a review, but it's definitely makes some assumptions. If your students are struggling, if you're working through those first units, just slow down. And again, I'm going to say this a lot. It's okay to step back and do more review on basics before moving forward. Your student finishes Math Sense 1, they move on to Math Sense 2, everybody's excited, you start working on it, and you just instantly realize that your student needs to go back and review some basics of like fractions or decimals or ratios. It's okay to put one book down and pick the old book up for a minute, or maybe a day or two, and just do review. This is something, memorizing is not the same as understanding concepts. I say this a lot, and this is hard because I think a lot of us were taught, especially with math, there was a lot of memorizing when we were in school. our learners, just a lot of them don't have the bandwidth to memorize things anymore, as much as it would make our lives easier and their lives easier. Explaining concepts to students, allowing them to keep reference sheets if they need them, and not spending too much time on any one review item. I had a tutor once who came and said that she had spent 3 weeks on nothing but the multiplication tables. And then the student quit. And she said, I don't know why they quit. And said, probably because that was probably too much of that to be happening over 3 weeks. So it's okay to allow your student to use reference sheets while they're kind of moving, and as long as they understand like what the concept of multiplication or division, or how it is that like decimals and percentages are related to each other. And the more we can kind of encourage them to do that, I think the more confidence we're going to build with the students that they can learn these things. Because again, I know just with me, and I out myself all the time as this, I use my phone calculator for like really easy math all the time, because I, at this point in my life, really struggle doing things inside my head. And I have taken all these tests before.
Christina, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it just like a really small handful of questions on the GED you can't use a calculator?
5 questions.
5 questions.
And that is out of 45 to 50 questions. And so many students they don't get those correct, and it's fine. They can still go on to pass the rest of the GED. Yes, thank you for that reminder, Hannah. I forgot to put that in here. If you've gone in and looked at the lesson plans, you've probably seen what these look like. If you haven't, this is what the lesson plans look like. It's kind of awkward doing this on Zoom because I have to share these virtually. This is half of a page, the top half of the page of the lesson plans. A lot of this information, it's good to look at. Much of this is, these are kind of standard layouts for lesson plans. I'm going to flip through these really quickly and then come back to this because I just want everybody to see. It's worth taking a look at the lesson objective, just with the idea, like, what is the student supposed to be able to do by the end of this? Use patterns to solve math problems with 80% accuracy, apply the powers of 10 to solve real life problems accurately and quickly with at least 80% accuracy. You will see that word 80% accuracy across most of these lesson plans, because that's been kind of our guiding light. If a student can do something with 80% accuracy, they're probably good to go. It's probably enough to get them moving forward. There is this section that says vocabulary here. It is helpful to just eyeball this before you start your lesson. These are things, sometimes some of the stuff that's on here you might look at and be like, well, that's obvious. But it's good to just have some sort of definition or a concept inside of your head of what these things mean. Because like, to me, a lot of the things looked obvious, but then there were some things as I was going through these lessons that I had to go myself and look up because I didn't have like a clear explanation. If I had to explain the concept to somebody else, it would be difficult. So these are kind of your cues, like these are things that you can go look up. Definitions of a lot of these words can be found in the glossary, and I'll show y'all where those are if you haven't looked. If it's not in the glossary, Google it. I have a slide that says that. So many math teachers before us have come up with great explanations for these things. You see this thing here that says math practices. We'll talk about that in just a second, so we're going to skip that. The materials show you what it is that you're going to be using in class, and almost always, the book is always listed. Khan Academy Distance Learning is listed every single one of these lessons plans as optional. And then here there's one that says NA, but there are other lessons that are going to have websites, they're going to have apps, they're going to have things that you can do with your learner that are directly related to what it is that's in this lesson plan. Before you meet, these are very kind of repetitive usually, like review the words listed under vocabulary, review the pages in the textbook before you meet. Understanding the powers of 10, you see that line, that's really where it's going to be like that third bullet is on all of the lesson plans, the thing that's going to tell you kind of what it is that you should review that's new in this lesson. This tells you with everyone, we say, hey, the answers start on page 176, and then any optional worksheets or websites. If you flip to the back of Math Sense 1 and Math Sense 2, there are these glossaries. It doesn't include everything. You may find stuff in Math Sense 2 that is like, it assumes that the student understands, and it's not listed because maybe it was defined in Math Sense 1. So again, you may just have to go and Google it, and that's, lots and lots out there. All right, math practices. This was a new concept to me when I moved to the state of Pennsylvania and started working in adult ed here. I had previously worked with English language learners and students doing kind of the reading and writing part of the GED and the high set. A little bit with math, but not so much. Math practices are something that, this is kind of a national concept. And if you Google math practices, you will actually find like a lot of websites and kind of explanations of what these are. But there are 8 of them. And these are used to train students to think like a mathematician. Some of them are and it's kind of to train students to think about these things while they're learning these new concepts so that they can kind of build up their confidence to keep going. We are going to be including some sort of explanation of the math practices on the lesson plan site at some point, but just so you all have them and you know what this reference is. And again, if you need more explanations at this exact moment, the thing to do is going to be like Google math practice number 8. And there's a lot of like really detailed explanations of this. I'm not going to get into that today, but that's really what we're looking at when we look at these. And this is a requirement that the state of Pennsylvania has, that we put these on the lesson plans and incorporate them in. So on the second page of the lessons, you're going to find really the meat of the lesson plan. And every lesson plan includes kind of the same, it's the same series of events that you're going to walk through. There's a warm-up, there's a lesson goal, there's a warm-up activity, new learning, which we call I do, guided learning, which is like the we do, you do. In some of the other learning, the other lesson plans, if you teach maybe a student reading and math, you might see that there's an I do, a we do, and a you do section. Math is kind of hard to parse out the we do and the you do. And what that means is you're presenting new learning, meaning I'm the one doing the talking right now. I'm going to explain this thing to my learner. We do and you do means that we're going to work on this thing together. And the idea is that you're eventually going to kind of hand the learning off to the student. So it's going to be less on you and the learner doing it together. And so that the student can do these things independently, which is really what the goal is to get them doing these things independently. So we have here, these lesson plans include a lot of kind of extra explanations so that it's not 100% dependent on what's in the book if you're using the lesson plans. We've included here, you can see there's a couple of scenarios that you can work through with your students. So you do the activities in the book, you do kind of what's on the lesson plan. The student says, cool, I got this. They're doing things to 80% accuracy. And then you can work through these scenarios with your learner. These are going to help you and your learner kind of build out on what's in the book. And these are kind of these extras that are in there. At the end, you're going to see assess is a part of every lesson plan. And really, this is to kind of help you gauge, does this learner, are they ready to move on? And if your student can do the things that are under assess, and if they can do them to 80% accuracy, they're probably ready to move on. if they can't do them to 80% accuracy, that is kind of your cue that you might need to, in the next lesson, review, or maybe tell the student like, hey, it's time for extra practice. Like, do you have time this week to work on this on your own? Go back and do the problems again in your book, or hey, here's Khan Academy. This is how you can find this. That's really, that 80% is where the assess comes in. And the assess is really to help you. How do you know that the learner is ready to move on? That's, I think, one of the hardest things that we have to deal with as instructors. And at the end of all of these, you're going to see a tutoring reflection. What went well? What would you change? It's useful to talk to the student, find out what it is that they thought went well that class, and then to ask them, what's one question that you still have? And that can help you put together what it is that you're going to do for the next lesson in the review portion. Across the bottom of the page, you guys see this for office use only. These are these are national standards that our textbooks use. You don't need to pay attention to these. They're just there. They're there for us to use when we're kind of aligning the lesson plans to the textbooks. All right, so how long do people spend on each section? And this is where, math is one of those things that it's really like it depends situation. It's so hard to gauge because math is like, review is so essential. And you may have a student who kind of has a strong basis in some of the foundations and basics. So it may be easy to move them through and maybe they need less review. And then you may have a student who really has some big gaps and you may need to adjust and spend half of your class reviewing, or even more than half the class reviewing, maybe 2/3 of the class reviewing and only 1/3 is new material. So that's something that you're going to have to work with your learner on to kind of figure out where they are. Generally right now, we are recommending that review is approximately a quarter of the lesson. And so that's going to be stuff from previous classes that, previous meetings that they just really struggled with, or some like the most challenging parts of the previous lesson. New material is going to be approximately half of the session. And that's, again, unless you need more time. And then the extra practice or the problems from the book, really adding more in, can be a quarter of the time unless you need more or less time. So what does that look like? So getting together with your student, previous lesson review, extra practice, 20-ish minutes for a 90-minute session, new content, 45 minutes, 50 minutes, and then extended practice from the web, problems from the book, 20-ish minutes, and then some sort of wrap up at the end to really make sure that you're asking your learner, what did you learn today? What do you still need help with? And then if you do want them doing anything outside of the book, or if they say, yes, I want homework, make sure that you explain it to them. I made this mistake a lot when I was teaching. I would assign homework for them to do, for the students to do, and then they would all come in and the homework would all not be correct, or they would turn things in that were very confusing to me as to what they had understood. And so what I learned from other teachers was it's best to go over 1 or 2 problems just to make sure that they understand what it is that you want them to do. We also like to include at the end of this, in your wrap up, confirm the next day and time that you're meeting with your student. It's just, this is a really good kind of organic place to slot that in. Like, hey, we're going to meet again on Tuesday at 6 o'clock, right? Oh no, I have a doctor's appointment or I have to work. So that can be kind of a good check-in with your student. All right, so the extra practice, there is information at the end of each of these lessons that has the extra practice that is kind of baked into the lesson plans. And all of these have, but again, like, you may find that your student needs more work. So obviously you can always go to Khan Academy, and we're going to talk briefly about that. It looks like we're probably going to have time to do a little bit of searching around that site. Math drills Tutor.com is a really good website for, like, there's, I think, 58,000 math worksheets that are there. They are free. You can actually pull them up, and the learners can pull them up and share their screen, and they can actually type on most of the worksheets, which is great. This is really good for kind of the lower level skills, so like fractions, percentages, multiplication. CK12.com is a really good math website that has it's kind of like Khan Academy. The thing about that is that you need a grade level. That information should be on the learning plan. Again, we try not to share the grade levels directly with the student because most of our students have done a lot of things in their lives, and when they find out that, you know, they've tested at like a 3rd or 4th grade math level, it can be really discouraging. But you can go onto the website. I would preview the material beforehand to make sure, like, if you have a student who's at like 4th grade, just make sure that it's appropriate using with an adult learner. For Math Sense 2, Khan Academy still, CK12 is great because it goes all the way through kind of high school learning. Lightandsaltlearning.org, I went over this last week, or the last presentation we have, I think the last tutor talk. This is a really great website for students who are taking the GED ready. So they're in Math Sense 2, they're getting ready to take the GED ready, or maybe they've already taken that practice test. This website can be really, really good for students to go and kind of surf around on their own once they start to know what it is that they need more work on. This website can also be good for tutors to preview the videos. It's a woman, she's a professional GED math teacher. Her explanations of things can be really intense, so they can be overwhelming for students. So it might be better to preview any videos. But I think she offers kind of alternatives of thinking about some kind of pretty advanced math concepts. And I think it's useful to have kind of other tools in your toolkit. She has a really, really, really good section on word problems. This is probably one of the best explanations that we've ever found for GED word problems. Students have really responded well to kind of the way that she breaks them down and the practice that she has there. If you've never seen it or known it, the GED math test is something like 60% word problems. And that is something, if you're wondering when you're flipping through Math Sense why there are so many word problems, that's why they're in there. So we do have something called New Readers Press Online Learning. It's an online platform, and it's specifically for students who have taken the GED ready in math. It's self-paced and solo work. It's mostly done outside of class time. But if you have a student who has taken the GED ready, they're working out a Math Sense 2, and they say, I want more. Like I'm close. I'm really, really close to passing the test, but I need more work than what's here. This program gives the student it takes their score and it assigns specific items and assignments to them, and then they work their way through those at their own pace. And when they're finished, I'm actually able to go into the back end and see what it is that they still need work on. And I am able to reach out to tutors and say, like, hey, you know, I looked at math stuff, it's looking good. He really still needs to work on like quadratic equations. So try to go brush up on that again with him if you can before he takes his next GED ready. Okay, Khan Academy. I love Khan for so many reasons, but it's also kind of a complicated website. So I really think that Khan is great for their video and printed explanations of things. I really like just the wealth of information that's out there. It's short, it's 5 minutes long. You're trying to work with a student and they're getting confused about like multiplying fractions. You can go to Khan and pull a video, and they're great. It's great for extended practice. There's entire lessons that are in there. So if you do like the whole lesson in Math Sense and you find that your student is like just not getting it, Khan's a great place to go to pull basically an entire lesson. And that might be something you can kind of pull that, look at it and see, okay, how do I walk through, like, where is my student, what is different in math sense that's here? Great, let's look at that. Maybe this will be like an alternate explanation. The cons to this are that there's no GED prep course in there. So you kind of have to dig around a little bit to find the math that you need. You need to know which area your students need practice with. And it's complicated if you want to build a class where like you're the teacher and your student is the student. I am happy to, we may have a few minutes and I likely would stop the recording. And if we do, I can kind of walk through with everybody here, kind of setting up Khan, but it's a great, great program. There's kind of two ways for accessing the videos. Again, the videos are what I think are really one of the shining stars of Khan. One of them is that you sign up for a Khan account. I find that signing up as a student is easier than trying to sign up as a teacher sometimes. You find the content that you want, you share the screen. The other thing you can do with Khan is you don't actually need to be signed into Khan to find things. You can just Google what you're looking for plus the word Khan. So like adding and subtracting fractions, Khan, and it's going to give you a listing of all of the videos that are on Khan on YouTube that you can watch with your student. There's tons more free resources out there that work. There's games, handouts, explanations, videos. Like my kind of rule for this, I've had people come to me and they say, well, like this works, but is it okay to use? And I'm like, if it works, use it. Whatever method works for your student is the method that you should use, because our goal for our students is to get them across, you know, to help them meet whatever goal it is. And for most of our students, it's getting that high school equivalency diploma. So whatever we can do to kind of help push them across that is really the key. One more thing, I don't know if anybody has this. I've heard from people, my son is only 6, so I don't have to deal with math homework yet, but I have heard from people, my universe of folks out there who had to start being at-home math teachers during COVID, that Microsoft Math Solver, there's a lot of apps that you can use on your phone. The reason I'm bringing this up is sometimes when you go into the back of Math Sense, you may find that the explanation, that there's a problem with an answer, your student got the wrong answer, you got the right answer, but you're not quite sure how to explain it to them. So you look at the explanation and maybe the explanation isn't clicking with your student. Maybe they need like a longer explanation. For equations, you can literally point your phone at the equation when you have this app open, and it will give you a detailed listing of sometimes 2 or 3 ways to break down a problem to explain. So this is a great kind of math hack that you can use to kind of complement what's in the back of Math Sense 1 and 2 when you're kind of hitting the wall with your explaining things. All right. Lesson plan website rollout, they're out. The Math Sense lessons are up. We will be reviewing and revising lessons over the next several months. As we're finding things that, you know, as you are using these, you are going to find things. So you might find like a bullet that's empty. You might find a lesson that's missing a page number or something. Maybe it's the wrong page number, or maybe the activity that's listed in there, those kind of additional activities, complementing activities, isn't actually related to the lesson. I say this because this was a huge project that we undertook over approximately the last 6 months. We now have lesson plans for, I think, like 15 or 20 books. So there are going to bound to be some errors, mistakes, oversights. We want you to tell us when you find those things. We also want us to tell us, like, maybe you start using these and you have really strong feelings one way or another about them. We want your feedback. When you log into the lesson plan website, at the very top underneath the line that says welcome tutors, there's a link that says please click here. You click that, it'll take you to a feedback form. Please, please, please let us know how it's going. And we are actually responding to the feedback. I've already been finding kind of things, improvements, but also just like tiny errors that were made. And we can go in and quickly fix those. So, all right, that is all the talking that I have to do. Does anybody have any questions or anything they want to share at this point? Was anything in the chat either? I'm actually going to stop. I'm going to stop recording, Joanne, if that's okay.
Okay.
I think we've gotten to, so give me 1 second. Stop sharing. Yeah.